Now, in our last video regarding ionic bonding, we have studied that the ionic bonding is a type of a chemical bonding where the atoms they actually convert into an ions. The atom they convert into an ions. Why do they convert into ions? The ions are basically the charged particles. They convert into ions by transferring electrons, okay, and they transfer the electron so that they acquire the stability. They acquire the stability like the noble gases, right? Like the noble gas configuration. They acquire the noble gas configuration, hence they have the stability. That is why the atoms they convert into ions. So the reason is that this atom they convert into ions due to the transference of electrons, and there's always a transference of electron between a metal and a non-metal. So basically, what is ionic bonding? Ionic bonding is a strong electrostatic force of attraction. It's a strong electrostatic force of attraction between ions due to transference of electron. So that is chemical, that is ionic bonding. That's a one type of chemical bonding, right? Ionic. So it between the ions, तो दो cation और anion के बीच में strong electrostatic force of attraction होता है और ions बनते हैं because of the transfer of electrons between a metal and a non-metal, right? So this we have studied in the previous uh, video. Now we will be talking about the characteristics shown by these ionic compounds. So there are certain properties, certain characteristics shown by these ionic compounds. So we will be talking about their characteristics. So the properties of an ionic compound are because of its structure and the because of its structure and the bonding, right? The properties. Now we need to understand that the ionic compound exists in the lattice form. The lattice is basically where you see the large number of ions, the oppositely charged ions, they're packed together, right? Now we have a lattice of sodium chloride where one sodium is surrounded by 6 chloride, because it's a three-dimensional figure. So one chloride in return will be bonded with 6 sodium ions, right? So this is basically known as lattice structure. Now this particular lattice structure has in this sodium chloride, because the sodium ions are bonded to the same number of chloride ions. That is why they give you a simplified formula for sodium chloride as NaCl. Okay, so this is how a 3D diagram. They never ask you to draw the diagram, but you need to know that the sodium and chlorine are in the ratio 1:1. Sometimes they give you certain lattice in which the different type of ion, they ask you what will be the formula for this particular compound. So in that scenario, you're going to count the number of ions of each type, and you're going to simplify, you're going to find out the simple ratio between that, and you will write it down as a formula for that particular ionic compound. So the ionic compound, they exist in the lattice form where a large number of cation and anion are ionically bonded together in the lattice structure form. As I told you that the properties of these compounds depends on this structure. The structure we know, it's always the lattice form, on the lattice structure and on the bonding. The bonding is basically ionic bonding. So इन दोनों चीजों के ऊपर उसकी properties बेस करती हैं, the structure which is basically lattice and the type of bonding which is basically the ionic bonding. इन दोनों चीज के ऊपर डिपेंड करती हैं आपकी properties. Now the ionic compounds की जो properties होती हैं, that is number one property that they have a high melting point and they have a high boiling point. And because they have a high melting and boiling point, they exist in the solid state. That's the next property. Okay, so we need to understand why do they have a high melting and boiling point. Now we know that they have a lattice structure. They have the numerous cations and the numerous anions present in them. ठीक है, और इन cations और anions के बीच में strong force of attraction है. जितना force of attraction होगा उनके बीच में, जितने cations और anions उस lattice में होंगे, उतना ही उनका melting point और बॉइलिंग पॉइंट उनको सेपरेट आउट, उस फोर्स ऑफ अट्रैक्शन को ब्रेक करने के लिए आपको ज्यादा एनर्जी चाहिए. So now because there are numerous cations ions in the lattice structure, that's why they have a high melting and boiling point. Because they have a high melting and boiling point, they exist in the solid state. So here we are able to explain the two properties which are based on the structure, which is the lattice structure, and on the ionic bonding. Then comes the third property, that they conduct electricity only in the molten form or in the aqueous form. They conduct electricity only in the molten form and aqueous form. Now, the electricity is conducted by the electricity can be conducted by the movement of particles. These particles can be either ions or they can be the electrons, but they need to be mobile. So in order to conduct electricity, you need to have either the mobile ions or you need to have a mobile electrons. अब यहाँ पर मोबाइल इलेक्ट्रॉन्स तो है नहीं, यहाँ पर तो इलेक्ट्रॉन ट्रांसफर हो गए जिसकी वजह से इन्होंने आयंस फॉर्म कर दिए. और अगर आयंस भी हैं तो यहाँ पर आयंस जो है वो स्ट्रांगली बॉन्डेड हैं और ये ज्यादातर एग्जिस्ट करते हैं सॉलिड स्टेट में. तो यहाँ पर जब तक आयंस ये यहाँ पर ये बॉन्ड ब्रेक नहीं होगा तो ये आयंस मोबाइल नहीं होंगे. So in order to have these mobile ions which are going to move and going to carry the charge, they're going to conduct the electricity, we need to have them in the either in the molten form और इन द aqueous फॉर्म. या तो आप इनको वाटर में डिसॉल्व करें या फिर आप उसको मेल्ट करें, ठीक है, खास टेम्परेचर पे उनको लिक्विफाई कर दें. तो उस सिनेरियो में ये जो आयंस होंगे ये मोबाइल होंगे और ये कंडक्ट करेंगे इलेक्ट्रिसिटी. अदरवाइज दे आर फ्यूज्ड, otherwise these ions are fused, they are bonded together by a strong electrostatic force, and because they are fused, they are not mobile, they will not conduct electricity. So they will be conducting electricity only in the molten and aqueous form. And the property number 4 is that almost all the ionic compounds, they are water soluble, they are soluble in water. So we can say that the properties are based on the structure and the properties. They often give you the questions where they ask you any one of these properties and they ask you to explain on the basis of structure and on the basis of bonding. So this is how you will be explaining them, on the basis of structure and bonding.